The hot coffee hits Damien's face like a burning slap. The dark liquid runs down his cheeks, staining his cleaner's uniform and splashing onto the freshly polished marble floor. Steam still rises from the reddened skin as a deathly silence takes over the luxurious lobby. Sebastian Maxwell, 25, holds the empty cup with a smile of cruel satisfaction. His friends laugh hysterically behind him, their phones held high, capturing every second of the humiliation. The echo of their laughter reverberates off the marble walls like a diabolical symphony. "Do you know who I am?" Sebastian shouts, getting so close that his hot breath touches Damien's coffee-soaked face. "I'm Sebastian Maxwell. My father owns this entire building, and you—" He pauses theatrically, savoring each poisonous word. "You are human garbage." Damien Miller, at 42, a multi-millionaire disguised as a cleaner, remains completely still. His hands don't tremble. His eyes show no surprise, only a disturbing calm that further confuses the arrogant young man. This is exactly the moment he has meticulously planned for months. The building's security guards watch from a distance, clearly uncomfortable, but without the courage to interfere. A secretary covers her mouth in horror. The noise of New York City outside seems distant, drowned out by the tension that cuts the air like a blade. "Clean that up now," Sebastian says, pointing to the coffee on the floor, his voice dripping with contempt. "And the next time you see my face, you lower your head like the worm you are." Damien bends down slowly, grabs a cloth from his cleaning cart, but his eyes never leave Sebastian's. There's something in that gaze that makes the young man unconsciously take a step back. "Very obedient," Sebastian laughs, but there's a forced note in his amusement. "At least you know your place in the world. But to fully understand what was about to happen from that moment on, we need to go back exactly 20 years, to a December night that would forever change the life of a young student named Damien Miller. Date, December 2005. The rain drumming against the windows of the 50th floor created a melancholic soundtrack for another night of work. Damien Miller, then only 22, pushed his cleaning cart through the empty hallways of the towering Maxwell building, his worn-out sneakers making a muffled sound on the luxurious carpeting. Every step was calculated, every movement economical. There was no time to lose. In 4 hours, he had to be at the university for his first classes. He had only slept 3 hours the night before, but the numbers in his bank account didn't lie. $23.40. Not even enough for a decent meal. Richard Maxwell's office shone under the artificial light, filled with trophies, framed diplomas, and photos with important personalities. Damien began to empty the trash cans, wipe the surfaces, and vacuum the Persian rug that probably cost more than 2 years of his salary. It was then that he saw the coffee cup, left dangerously close to a pile of important documents. He leaned over carefully, trying to move it, but his hand, trembling with exhaustion, knocked it over. The dark liquid spread over the papers like ink on a blank canvas. Contracts, proposals, financial reports, all hopelessly stained. "What the hell is going on in here?" The voice cut through the silence like a whip. Richard Maxwell, then 35, stood in the doorway. His eyes quickly took in the scene. The young cleaner paralyzed with fear, the coffee seeping into the documents, the undeniable evidence of the disaster. "Mr. Maxwell, I'm so sorry. It was an accident," Damien began. But the explanation died in his throat when he saw the expression on the executive's face. "An accident?" Richard advanced, his steps echoing like gunshots. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed? Those documents are worth millions. Please, I can clean it. I can try to save them." "You're useless," Richard exploded, his voice reverberating off the walls. "People like you will never amount to anything. You'll never get out of the gutter you were born in." The words hit Damien like physical blows. Every syllable was seared into his memory, marking him in a way that scars never fully heal. "You're fired," Richard growled, getting so close that Damien could feel the hot coffee-scented breath on his face. "And don't expect to get this month's paycheck. Consider it compensation for the damages." "Sir, please, I need that money for college." "College?" Richard laughed with genuine cruelty. "A failure like you in college? Stop dreaming and accept reality. You were born to sweep floors, and you'll die sweeping floors." Richard's hands grabbed Damien's shirt, pushing him violently against the wall. The young man's head hit the cold marble, leaving him dizzy and humiliated. "Get out of my sight before I call security." Damien stumbled out of the building and straight into the storm. The icy rain mixed with the tears he could no longer hold back. His soaked clothes clung to his thin body as he walked aimlessly through the deserted streets. He stopped in front of the skyscraper, looking up at the lights on the upper floors that cut through the darkness like unreachable stars. There, with $50 in his pocket and a bruised face, Damien made a promise that would resonate for the next 20 years of his life. But that humiliation wouldn't just be the end of a chapter. It would be the fuel that would power a transformation that no one, especially Richard Maxwell, could have ever imagined. 2005, 2010. The first years after the humiliation passed in a blur of insane work and blind determination. Damien transformed his anger into his most potent fuel, working 18 hours a day, sleeping a maximum of 4, living on coffee and willpower. During the day, he worked at a bakery. In the afternoon, he delivered pizzas. At night, he studied engineering. On weekends, he cleaned offices, never again in the Maxwell building, but the irony of continuing to sweep floors was not lost on him. "You're killing yourself," Mary, the owner of the bakery, told him, looking at Damien's bloodshot eyes as he kneaded dough at 5 in the morning. "When was the last time you slept a full night?" "Sleep is for those who can afford it," he replied, his hands working with mechanical precision. "I have a debt to settle, with 20 years of interest." He graduated with top honors. While other students celebrated with proud families, Damien was alone at the ceremony, holding his degree as if it were a newly forged weapon. Every high grade had been a small revenge, every award a piece on the chessboard he was setting up. He got a job at a prestigious financial consulting firm. He wasn't the most talented in his class, but he was definitely the hungriest. While his colleagues went out for drinks, Damien stayed late studying markets, analyzing investments, absorbing knowledge like a thirsty sponge. "Miller, you're working too much," his supervisor told him, finding him in the office at 2 in the morning. "You're going to burn out. I'd rather burn out trying than live regretting not trying hard enough." His first investments were small but smart. He saved every penny, lived in a tiny apartment, ate lentils almost every day. Every dollar saved was reinvested. Every profit turned into bigger opportunities. The obsession, however, came at a price. Relationships were luxuries he couldn't afford. Friendships were unnecessary distractions. A social life was wasted time that could be used to build his revenge. "You need a life outside of work," insisted Charles, his only friend from college. "When was the last time you had fun?" "I have fun every time I see my bank account balance grow," Damien replied, but there was a coldness in his voice that made Charles pull back. At 27, he had accumulated his first $500,000. He wasn't rich by normal standards, but for someone who had started with $50 in the rain, it was an empire, and it was still just the beginning. At night, when the city slept, Damien stayed awake, planning. He had a folder with clippings about the Maxwell family. He knew about every business, every move, every weakness of the company. It wasn't stalking, it was reconnaissance. "Richard Maxwell," he would whisper to himself, studying a photo of the executive in a business magazine. "You don't know it yet, but your lesson is coming." But it was during this period of total obsession that a psychologist named Eleanor Hayes would enter his life completely unexpectedly, forcing him to confront not only his enemies, but also the demons he had created within himself. 2015. Eleanor Hayes entered Damien's life like a ray of sunshine breaking through a storm. He was in the hospital after fainting at work, a consequence of 72 hours without proper sleep, when she appeared as the on-call psychologist. "Mr. Miller, you need to tell me what's going on," she said, sitting by his bed with a kind but firm smile. 28-year-old men don't collapse from exhaustion unless they're running from something very big. "I'm not running," Damien replied, avoiding her penetrating gaze. "I'm chasing something." "Ah," Eleanor nodded, taking notes. "And what are you chasing so urgently that you can't even stop to eat properly?" For the first time in years, Damien hesitated. There was something about her presence that disarmed all his defense mechanisms. Eleanor wasn't just beautiful, she was luminous in a way he had forgotten existed. Over the next few sessions, she managed to extract pieces of the story he had kept locked away in the safe of his heart. Not everything. The specific humiliation remained his secret, but enough for her to understand the rage that consumed him. "Damien, you've been using pain as fuel for so long that you've forgotten there are other ways to move through life," she told him during one of their walks in the park, 3 months after they met. "And what would those ways be?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Love, hope, a purpose that goes beyond revenge." "That's very romantic, but it doesn't pay the bills or build empires." Eleanor stopped walking, forcing him to look at her. "Damien, empires built on anger crumble. Those built on love are eternal. The wedding was small but significant. Eleanor had met his family, a mother who cleaned houses and a father who had worked his whole life as a mechanic. Simple, honest people who raised an extraordinary son without ever fully understanding the storm that brewed in his heart. "Son," his mother said, adjusting his tie on the wedding day, "that girl is going to be your salvation. Don't let the past rob you of the future." The words resonated in his mind as he watched Eleanor walk down the aisle. For the first time in years, Damien felt something beyond anger or ambition. He felt hope. His company, Miller Capital, was growing exponentially, but now there was a purpose beyond revenge, to build a legacy for the family he was creating. When Eleanor became pregnant with their first child, Damien spent sleepless nights not planning the destruction of enemies, but imagining what kind of father he wanted to be. "Will you ever tell him about that night?" Eleanor asked, stroking her 6-month belly as they watched the sunset from the window of their new, still modest apartment in a decent neighborhood. "I don't know if I should," Damien admitted. "I don't want him to grow up carrying my hatred." "Then maybe it's time to let that hatred go." But even with domestic happiness blooming, the shadow of Richard Maxwell remained. Damien still read about the family's business, still kept clippings, still dreamed of the moment of reckoning. Eleanor knew, women always know, but she chose to fight that war with patience and love. The birth of their son was a moment of pure magic. Holding that small, perfect being in his arms, Damien felt a vulnerability he hadn't experienced since that night in the rain. "He's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, exhausted but radiant. "What are we going to name him?" "Diego," Damien replied immediately. "Diego Miller. A strong name for a boy who will never have to go through what I went through." But fate had other plans. 3 years later, an innocent article in a business magazine would change everything. Maxwell Corporation faces financial difficulties. The old wounds opened up as if they were fresh, and the thirst for revenge, dormant but never dead, awoke with renewed force. The war that Damien had postponed in the name of love was about to begin, and this time he had much more to lose and much more power to win. Moitus 2018-2023. The magazine slipped from Damien's hands as if it were on fire. On the cover, the headline screamed, "The Maxwell Empire in Crisis. Debts Threaten the Family Legacy." The photo showed Richard Maxwell, now 48, visibly older and tired, leaving a meeting with investors. "Dad, are you okay?" asked Sophia, his 8-year-old daughter, noticing the strange expression on her father's face. "I'm great, Princess." Damien forced a smile, hiding the magazine. "How about you help Mum in the kitchen while Daddy takes care of some business?" Eleanor watched everything from the kitchen doorway. She knew that look. It was the same one he had when he worked 20 hours a day in the early years of their marriage. The flame of obsession, which she thought she had extinguished, had just been reignited. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor found Damien in his office, surrounded by papers, his laptop open to several tabs about Maxwell Corporation. "Damien," she said softly, but her voice carried a clear warning. "Don't. You don't even know what I'm thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking. And I need to remind you that you have a family that loves you, children who need you present, not obsessed with ghosts from the past." Damien stood up, walking to the window overlooking the glittering city. His net worth had surpassed $100 million. He had a solid company, a beautiful family, respect in the business community. By any objective measure, he had succeeded in life. "Eleanor, you don't understand. That man didn't just humiliate me. He tried to break my spirit. He said I would never be anything, and you proved him wrong. Isn't that enough? He doesn't know he was wrong. He doesn't know that the young man he humiliated has become more powerful than him. There's no justice in that." Eleanor came closer, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Honey, there's a difference between justice and revenge. One builds, the other destroys. Which one do you want to teach Diego and Sophia?" For weeks, the internal battle consumed Damien. Eleanor tried to distract him with family dinners, trips, moments of intimacy, but she could feel his mind spinning, planning, calculating. The opportunity presented itself when James Morris, the most respected lawyer in the city, appeared in his office with an unexpected proposal. "Mr. Miller, I have information that might interest you. Maxwell Corporation has debts spread among dozens of small creditors. Someone with enough capital could acquire those debts discreetly and have total control over the company," Damien completed, his eyes shining with possibility. "Exactly, but I must warn you, this would cost about $40 million and would be ethically questionable. Damien remained silent for long minutes. 40 million was a substantial amount, but far from compromising his financial stability. The question wasn't if he could, but if he should. "Mr. Morris, I need detailed information on the Maxwell family, especially on the son, Sebastian." The investigation revealed a spoiled, arrogant 25-year-old, known for treating employees like trash, just like his father. There were videos on social media of him humiliating waiters, yelling at janitors, showing the same contempt Richard had shown 2 decades earlier. "It's like he's a clone of his father," Damien muttered, watching a video of Sebastian yelling at a receptionist for a scheduling mistake. That night, Eleanor tried one last time. "Damien, I'm begging you, don't do it. You have everything you ever dreamed of. Don't let the thirst for revenge destroy our happiness." Damien hugged her, breathing in the soft scent of her hair. "It won't destroy our happiness, honey. It will complete it. I need to close this chapter, or it will haunt me forever. And what if closing that chapter changes you? What if you become as cruel as them?" It was a question Damien couldn't answer. But the next day, he called James Morris and said the words that would set in motion the most elaborate revenge ever planned. "Buy all the debts. And I want you to prepare a plan for a lesson the Maxwells will never forget." What none of them knew was that this revenge would test not only the arrogance of the Maxwells, but also the soul of Damien Miller in ways he had never imagined. 3 months before the humiliation, the bathroom mirror reflected a Damien Miller that few would recognize. His hair was slightly disheveled, a 2-day-old beard, simple and worn clothes. The physical transformation was impressive, from a respected multimillionaire to an invisible cleaner. "My goodness, honey, you're unrecognizable," Eleanor said from the doorway, her voice a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I need to see with my own eyes how Sebastian treats the employees," Damien replied, adjusting his work shirt. "I can't base my strategy solely on internet videos." "Strategy," Eleanor repeated the word bitterly. "How you talk as if it's a war." "It is a war, Eleanor. A war that started 20 years ago and needs to end." For a week, Damien worked as a temporary cleaner in the Maxwell building. The irony was palpable. He was cleaning the same hallways where he was humiliated 2 decades earlier, but now with enough power to buy the entire building 3 times over. The first encounter with Sebastian happened on the 3rd day. The young man stormed into the lobby like a hurricane, yelling into his phone about some deal that had gone wrong. "I don't want to hear excuses. Either you fix it today or find another job." Sebastian hung up forcefully, nearly throwing the phone against the wall. That's when he saw Damien mopping the floor near the elevators. "Hey you," Sebastian called out with disdain. "When you're done cleaning, make sure there are no streaks on the marble. Last time you guys did a terrible job." "Yes, sir," Damien replied, keeping his eyes down as expected of a subordinate employee. "And another thing, don't get in the way of the executives. You people are practically invisible, and that's how it should stay." With each interaction, Damien mentally documented Sebastian's behavior. The young man was even worse than the videos suggested. He treated employees like objects, never said thank you, and yelled over any minor inconvenience. "Perfect," Damien muttered to himself after witnessing Sebastian humiliate a secretary for forgetting to buy his favorite coffee. "You're exactly what I expected you to be." The cameras were installed discreetly during the 2nd week. James Morris had hired a specialized security firm, ensuring everything was legal and discreet. "The cameras capture high-definition audio and video," the technician explained, "completely undetectable, and they transmit in real time to your devices." Damien could now monitor Sebastian from anywhere. He saw every tantrum, every burst of anger, every moment of gratuitous cruelty. It was like studying a predator in its natural habitat. Eleanor found him one night watching the recordings, his face illuminated by the bluish light of the monitor. "You're turning into someone I don't recognize," she said, her voice filled with sadness. "I'm turning into someone who can deliver justice." "Justice or obsession?" Damien paused the video, a scene of Sebastian yelling at an elderly security guard, and turned to face the woman he loved. "Eleanor, you know the whole story. You know what Richard did to me, how that humiliation shaped every day of the last 20 years. Now I have the chance to close that circle. And then what? So after you humiliate his son in the same way you were humiliated, what will be left of the man I married?" It was a question Damien couldn't answer, because deep down, he didn't know either. The final plan was crafted with surgical precision. Damien studied Sebastian's routines, identifying the perfect moment. A Thursday morning, when the young man always arrived stressed from a difficult meeting with investors. "Everything is ready, Mr. Miller," James Morris confirmed over the phone. "The debts are consolidated, the documents are prepared, and we have enough evidence to press both civil and criminal charges if necessary. And the media, 3 different journalists are waiting for the material. As soon as the humiliation video is released, they have stories ready about the abusive behavior of executives." Damien hung up and looked at himself in the mirror. Tomorrow was the day. 20 years of preparation converging into a single moment of revenge. But as he prepared for sleep, a small voice in his head, one that sounded suspiciously like Eleanor's, asked him if revenge would truly bring him the peace he sought, or if it would only create new demons to haunt the rest of his life. One day after the humiliation, the offices of Miller Capital had never received such a desperate visitor. Richard Maxwell, now 55, waited in the reception area like a condemned man awaiting his sentence. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through a magazine he wasn't really reading. "Mr. Maxwell?" Damien's secretary, an elegant middle-aged woman, appeared with a professional smile. "Mr. Miller can see you now." Richard followed her down a hallway decorated with photos of the company's social projects. Schools built, scholarships offered, programs for underprivileged youth. Ironically, all funded by the man he had humiliated decades ago. The office door opened, revealing a sophisticated but not ostentatious space. Damien stood behind a mahogany desk, wearing an impeccable suit, radiating the quiet authority of someone who has succeeded in life. "Richard Maxwell," Damien said, his voice as calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. "What a pleasure to finally have you in my office." Richard stopped in the middle of the room, his brain slowly processing the implications. There was something familiar about that face, that voice, but he couldn't connect the dots. "Mr. Miller, thank you for seeing me. I know you're a very busy man," Richard began, but Damien cut him off with a gesture. "Sit down, Richard. Or may I call you Richard? After all, you Maxwells are so fond of informality when dealing with people you consider inferior." The tone made Richard instinctively recoil. There was an edge to Damien's voice that he recognized but couldn't place. "Mr. Miller, I've come to discuss a delicate situation involving my family and your company." "Ah, yes," Damien interrupted again, walking toward a wall where his degrees and certificates hung. "You must be talking about the $42 million in debt your company owes, debts that coincidentally now belong to me." The blood drained from Richard's face. How did I know?" "Richard, information is power, and power is something I have in abundance." Damien turned, his eyes fixed on Richard's with laser intensity. "The real question is, do you know who I am? Mr. Miller, owner of Miller Capital, one of the most respected businessmen in the city. That's what I've become," Damien said, slowly walking around the desk like a predator circling its prey. "But it's not who I was when you first met me." Richard frowned, a growing unease in his chest. Damien stopped directly in front of him, leaning in until their faces were inches apart. "December 2005, the 50th floor of your old building. A young cleaner spilled coffee on your documents." Richard's eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. His hands began to tremble violently. "No," he whispered. "Yes, Richard. That young cleaner you assaulted, humiliated, and threw out onto the street like trash was me, Damien Miller." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at the man before him, the $1,000 suit, the luxurious office, the degrees on the wall, and saw the scared, broken young man he had destroyed 20 years ago. "My God," Richard murmured, sinking into the chair. "Damien, You what, Richard? Are you sorry? Did you not imagine your words would have consequences? That the human garbage you trampled on would become more powerful than you?" Richard tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Damien opened a folder on the desk, spreading out documents. Debt contracts, financial reports, evidence of mismanagement, all perfectly legal, Richard. I could destroy everything you've built with a single word. "Please," Richard finally managed to say. "I know I deserved this, I know I was a monster to you, but my family—" "Your family," Damien laughed coldly. "You're worried about your family now? Interesting. Do you remember the exact words you said to me that night?" Richard shook his head, tears beginning to well up. "People like you will never amount to anything. You'll never get out of the gutter you were born in." Damien recited each word with surgical precision. "Well, Richard, I got out of the gutter. In fact, I built a mansion on top of it." "Damien, please, I'm begging you." "Your pleas don't interest me," Damien cut in. "I'm interested in justice. And justice, Richard, has a specific price. Your son is going to learn what it means to work for a living. He's going to learn what humility means. Sebastian had nothing to do with what happened between us, didn't he? Damien turned on a monitor, showing a compilation of videos of Sebastian mistreating employees. Your son is exactly like you were. Cruel, arrogant, inhuman. Like father, like son. Richard watched the videos in horror, recognizing his own cruelty reflected in his son's actions. So here is my offer, Damien said, his voice cutting through the air like a sword. Sebastian will work as a cleaner for 6 months. He will learn what it means to sweat for every penny, what it means to be treated as invisible, what dignity and honest work means. And if I refuse? Damien smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then tomorrow you will wake up bankrupt. Sebastian will be in jail for assault, and the story of you two will be on the front page of every newspaper in the city. Richard closed his eyes, recognizing there was no choice. The revenge had closed like a perfect trap, 20 years in the making. But what neither man in the room could foresee was that this meticulously planned revenge would trigger transformations that would go far beyond simple retribution. Durry-free. 2 days after the revelation. The meeting was arranged in James Morris's office, neutral ground for a negotiation that would define the fate of 2 families. Richard arrived on time, accompanied by Sebastian, who still showed bruises on his face from his arrest and subsequent $100,000 bail. "Dad, I don't understand why we're here," Sebastian muttered as they walked down the hall. "That filthy cleaner assaulted me. He should be in jail, not extorting our family." "Shut up, Sebastian," Richard hissed. "You have no idea what you've done." The conference room was imposing, with a marble table that could seat 20 people. Damien was already there, impeccably dressed, next to Morris, who was organizing an impressive pile of documents. "Gentlemen," Morris began with professional formality, "you are here because Mr. Miller has offered a civilized alternative to what could be a much more complicated situation." Sebastian looked from one man to the other, confused. Who the hell is Miller, and why is this expensive lawyer treating that cleaner as if he were... The realization hit Sebastian like a punch to the gut when Damien slowly stood up, his eyes fixed on the young man with the same laser intensity he had used on his father. "Sebastian Maxwell," Damien said, his voice filled with serene authority. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Damien Miller, owner of Miller Capital, current holder of $42 million in your family's debt, and yes, the filthy cleaner you doused with hot coffee 3 days ago." Sebastian's world collapsed in seconds. His hands trembled, his breathing became ragged, and he looked at his father for any explanation that made sense. "Impossible," he stammered. You were cleaning the floor. I was exactly what you expected to see," Damien completed. "An invisible, disposable, subhuman man, someone who existed only to serve and be humiliated for your amusement." Morris opened the first folder, spreading out photos that made Sebastian turn pale. They were screenshots from dozens of videos, him yelling at waiters, shoving janitors, humiliating receptionists. "We have extensive documentation of Mr. Sebastian's abusive behavior," Morris explained clinically. "Witnesses willing to testify. Video evidence, records of employee complaints that were ignored by management." "You recorded me?" Sebastian exploded. "That's an invasion of privacy." "That's documentation of criminal behavior," Damien corrected. "Every video was recorded on public property or with the victim's knowledge. Perfectly legal." Richard finally found his voice. "Damien, I know you have every right to hate us, but Sebastian is young. He can change." "He can change?" Damien laughed humorlessly. "Richard, your son is 25. At the same age, I was building an empire from the ashes. He was building a reputation for sadism." Damien walked to the window overlooking the city. "But you're right about one thing. People can change. I changed. The question is, do you want the chance to change, or do you prefer the consequences?" Morris placed 2 sets of documents on the table. Option 1. Sebastian works as a cleaner for 6 months under the direct supervision of Mr. Miller. Minimum wage, no special privileges, treated exactly like any other employee. Option 2, Richard asked, though he dreaded the answer. Immediate bankruptcy of Maxwell Corporation. Criminal proceedings against Sebastian for assault and harassment. The full story, including the original humiliation, published in every media outlet in the city. Sebastian stood up abruptly. "You can't force me to work as a cleaner. I'm Sebastian Maxwell." "You're a spoiled young man who has never worked an honest day in his life," Damien replied calmly. "But you're right about one thing. I can't force you. I can only offer consequences for your choices. "And if I accept," Sebastian said through clenched teeth, "what's to guarantee you won't publicly humiliate me anyway?" Damien returned to the table, his intense gaze fixed on Sebastian. "Because, unlike you, I keep my word. If you complete the 6 months, all debts will be forgiven. Your family will keep the company, your reputation will remain intact, and you will have learned something that no expensive university could ever teach you." And what would that be? How it feels to be human. The silence in the room was palpable. Richard looked at his son, silently pleading with him to make the right choice. Sebastian looked at his hands, fighting against decades of privilege and arrogance. 6 months? He finally asked. 180 days. 40 hours a week. Cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, maintaining floors. Exactly the job you've always despised. Sebastian closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in his life, made a decision based on necessity rather than desire. "I accept," but neither Sebastian nor Damien imagined that those 6 months would not only transform a spoiled young man into a dignified man, but would also force Damien himself to confront whether revenge would truly bring the peace he had sought for 2 decades. 2 months after the ultimatum, Sebastian's hands were no longer those of a privileged young man. Rough calluses decorated his palms, the result of 8 weeks of wielding brooms, mops, and cleaning products. His back ached constantly, his knees complained with every movement, and his clothes carried the persistent smell of disinfectant. "Maxwell," shouted Carlos, the cleaning supervisor, a 50-year-old man with graying hair and limited patience. "The 12th floor bathroom needs special attention. Someone threw up in stall 3. "Yes, sir," Sebastian replied automatically, grabbing his supplies. 2 weeks ago, he would have exploded with rage. Now, he simply obeyed. Damien watched everything through the security cameras, set up in a temporary office in the building. Every move Sebastian made was monitored, every bit of progress documented. What had started as vengeful surveillance was transforming into something more complex, a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity. "How's he doing?" Eleanor asked, entering the office with coffee and sandwiches. She had insisted on visiting him daily, worried about her husband's growing obsession. "Better than I expected," Damien admitted, pausing the video on a scene of Sebastian patiently cleaning graffiti off a wall. "He still has occasional outbursts, but he's changing. Maybe." Eleanor sat beside him, studying the expression on her husband's face. "Damien, do you realize you spend more time watching Sebastian than with your own children?" The observation hit him like a stab wound. Damien realized that in recent weeks he had missed Sophia's piano recital, Diego's soccer game, and 3 family dinners. "It's temporary," he muttered, but it sounded false even to him. On the screen, Sebastian was being confronted by a drunk executive who had spilled red wine on the marble floor of the reception area. "Hey, cleaner!" the executive yelled, clearly intoxicated. "Clean up this mess now. And do it right or I'll talk to your boss." 2 months ago, Sebastian would have erupted in fury. Today he simply nodded and began to work, ignoring the insults and derogatory comments, but there was something in his posture, a quiet dignity that didn't exist before. "Interesting," Eleanor murmured, watching the scene. "He's learning to control his anger, or he's just resigned to the situation." "No, honey. Look at his eyes. There's no resignation, there's determination." Damien zoomed in on Sebastian's face. Eleanor was right. The young man's eyes showed not defeat, but a growing resolve, as if each humiliation was forging something new in his character. The real test came in the 10th week. Sebastian was cleaning the women's restroom when he heard shouts coming from the hallway. He went out to investigate and found Marcus Vance, an executive known for his inappropriate behavior, cornering Sarah, a young intern. "Come on, beautiful," Marcus insisted, blocking her exit. "Just one drink. You want to get ahead in this company, don't you?" "Mr. Vance, please, I have to go." Sarah tried to dodge him, clearly uncomfortable. For seconds that felt like an eternity. Sebastian hesitated. Interfering would mean a confrontation, a possible firing, a breach of the agreement with Damien. But seeing the fear in Sarah's eyes, something inside him finally broke. "Mr. Vance," Sebastian said, his voice calm but firm. "I believe the lady has made it clear she's not interested." Marcus turned, irritated. "And who the hell are you to—" "I'm someone who believes that all people, regardless of their position, deserve respect." The words came out naturally, but Sebastian was surprised to realize he actually believed them. Marcus, taken aback by the audacity of a mere cleaner, backed off and walked away, muttering threats. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. No one has ever. You don't have to thank me, Sebastian replied. I was just doing the right thing. On the security monitors, Damien saw the entire scene. Something strange happened in his chest, a feeling he hadn't expected. Pride. Pride in seeing Sebastian make the right choice, defend someone vulnerable, show true courage. Eleanor, he said softly, I think we've made a mistake. What do you mean? I thought I was teaching Sebastian a lesson about humility, but I think he's teaching me something about redemption. Eleanor smiled, placing her hand on his. And what are you going to do with that discovery? Damien looked at the screen, where Sebastian had returned to work with an expression he recognized, the same determination that had fueled his own transformation 20 years ago. I don't know, he admitted. But for the first time in 2 decades, I'm not sure that revenge is really what I want. The problem was, with 3 months left in the agreement, the true transformation of both men was just beginning, and the hardest lessons were yet to come. 4 months after the beginning of the punishment, the wail of the ambulance siren cut through the building's silence at 2 in the morning. Sebastian ran through the empty hallways, his heart racing as he followed the paramedics to the 18th floor. Carmen, the 67-year-old cleaner who had become his only true friend in recent months, had collapsed during the night shift. Carmen, can you hear me? He whispered, holding her frail hand while the paramedics worked. His own hands, now calloused from work, trembled with genuine concern. Son, she murmured, opening her eyes with difficulty. My blood pressure. The medicine is too expensive. I haven't been taking it. Don't worry about that now, Sebastian said, his voice cracking. I'll take care of everything. On the security monitors, Damien watched the scene with mixed emotions. He had planned every aspect of Sebastian's humiliation, but he hadn't anticipated this, genuine humanity emerging from someone he considered irredeemable. At the hospital, Sebastian spent the entire early morning in the waiting room. At 6 a.m., when he finally learned that Carmen was stable, he did something that surprised even himself. He called his father. Dad, I need $5,000, he said without preamble when Richard answered. Sebastian, you know our financial situation. It's not for me, Sebastian interrupted. It's for Carmen, a co-worker. She needs medication and can't afford it. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Sebastian, Richard said finally, his voice filled with something that might have been pride. You've changed. Yes, Dad, I've changed. When the money was transferred and Carmen's medication was paid for, Sebastian felt something he had never experienced. True satisfaction. Not the superficial satisfaction of buying something expensive or humiliating someone, but the deep contentment of making a difference in another person's life. Damien decided it was time for a direct conversation. He found Sebastian at the end of his shift in the building's nearly empty parking garage. Sebastian, he called, stepping out of the shadows like a ghost from the past. The young man turned, and for the first time in months he looked directly into Damien's eyes without anger or resentment. Mr. Miller, he said simply, I figured you'd show up at some point. You saved Carmen's life today. I did what any decent person would do. Decent people, Damien repeated, savoring the words. 4 months ago, you threw hot coffee in my face and called me human garbage. What's changed? Sebastian leaned against a car, looking at his calloused hands. I discovered what it means to work for a living. I discovered that dignity has nothing to do with money or social status. I discovered that I was a monster. And now I'm trying to be better. Sebastian looked at Damien seriously. Mr. Miller, I know you planned all this as revenge, and you deserved every second of your anger. But you need to know, these 4 months haven't been a punishment for me. They've been a salvation. Damien felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. 20 years ago, he said slowly, your father told me I would never be anything, that people like me would never get out of the gutter, and you proved him wrong. Yes, but in the process, I became obsessed with revenge. I neglected my family. I lost precious moments with my children. I almost destroyed my marriage. Sebastian frowned. Why are you telling me this? Because you've shown me something I had forgotten, that real change comes from within, not from external circumstances. You didn't change because you were forced to clean toilets. You changed because you chose to see the value in people you once considered invisible. And what does that mean for the next 2 months of our agreement? Damien remained silent for long moments, battling demons he had carried for 2 decades. It means that maybe it's time for me to choose change instead of revenge too. Sebastian extended his calloused hand. Mr. Miller, if you give me the chance, I'd like to work for your company. not out of obligation, but by choice. I've learned more about business and about life in the last 4 months than in my entire previous existence. Damien looked at the outstretched hand. Shaking it would mean forgiving not only Sebastian, but perhaps, more importantly, forgiving himself for 20 years of bitterness. But as he extended his own hand to accept the handshake, a question echoed in his mind. After 2 decades of planning revenge, did he really have the courage to choose forgiveness? The answer would come in the most difficult conversation he still had to have, not with Sebastian, but with the man who had started it all, Richard Maxwell. 5 months after the ultimatum, the office where it had all begun 20 years ago remained exactly as Damien remembered it. Large windows with panoramic city views, an imposing mahogany desk, an air of unquestionable authority. The difference was that now Richard Maxwell was on the vulnerable side of the desk, and Damien held all the power. "Thank you for coming," Damien said, gesturing to the chair where he himself had sat during the revelation months ago. "I imagine it can't be easy to come back here." Richard, visibly thinner and with more grey hair, sat down with the wounded dignity of a man who had lost everything except his family. "Actually, it's fitting," Richard replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "This office is where I made the biggest mistake of my life. It's only right that this is where I face the consequences. Do you know why I asked you to meet me? Sebastian told me about your conversation, about your proposal." Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "He said you offered him a permanent position in your company." "I did. Your son has proven to be trustworthy." Richard smiled sadly. "You've accomplished in 5 months what I couldn't in 25 years. You've turned my son into a real man." "It wasn't me, Richard. It was the work. It was the humility. It was discovering he was capable of empathy." Damien stood up, walking to the window that had witnessed so many pivotal moments. "The question is, are you capable of the same transformation? You want to know if I'm sorry?" "No. I want to know if you truly understand what you did that night." Richard remained silent for long minutes, his hands clasped in his lap like a man in prayer. "That night," he began slowly, "I didn't see a human being. I didn't see a young, hard-working man trying to pay for college. I didn't see dreams, hopes, or dignity." His voice began to break. "I saw something I could break to feel powerful. And that, Damien, is unforgivable." "Go on." "I didn't just physically assault you. I tried to murder your soul. I tried to convince you that you were worthless, that you would never be anything, that you should accept a subhuman place in society." Tears began to roll down Richard's cheeks. "And the sickest part is, I did it because I was having a bad day. My own frustration, my own failures, I took them out on you." Damien turned, observing the man who had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. "Do you know what the worst part was, Richard? It wasn't the cruel words or the physical assault. It was the fact that for a moment I believed you. For a moment, standing in the rain with $50 in my pocket, I thought maybe you were right. May God forgive me." "God can forgive you, Richard. The question is, can I?" The silence that followed was filled with 20 years of pain, anger, obsession, and finally, the possibility of healing. "Damien," Richard said, his voice trembling, "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know you could destroy what's left of my life with a single word, but—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "If there is any chance for redemption, to do something to fix what I broke, there is something you can do." Richard looked up, a cautious hope shining in his eyes. "Work for me," Damien said simply. "Not as an executive, not as a partner, as an employee. Modest salary, no special privileges. Help build the company's social programs. Use your experience to mentor low-income youth. You would give me that chance?" "After everything?" Damien returned to the desk, sitting in the same chair where he had planned his revenge for months. "Richard, I spent 20 years hating you, 20 years planning your destruction, 20 years allowing that night to define who I was." He paused, looking at his hands. "Bert, my 12-year-old son, said something to me last week that changed my perspective." "What did he say?" "He asked me why I was always working, always distant, always worried about things he didn't understand. When I couldn't answer, he said, 'Dad, do you remember you taught me that the best people are the ones who choose kindness even when they've been hurt?'" Richard closed his eyes, understanding the depth of those simple words. "So here is my final choice, Richard. I can complete my revenge, destroy you completely, and prove that I am just as cruel as you were that night. Or I can choose to be the man my family deserves, that my company represents, that young cleaner dreamed of becoming." "And what is your choice?" Damien stood up, extending his hand to the man who had been his torment for 2 decades. "Welcome to the team, Richard." But as the two men shook hands, symbolizing the end of a cycle of hatred and the beginning of something new, neither of them imagined that the true test of forgiveness was yet to come in the form of a Christmas celebration that would bring together two families marked by the same trauma, but finally free to write a different ending to their story. Suez, 6 months after the ultimatum, Christmas Eve. The Miller family home had never hosted such unlikely guests. Eleanor supervised the final dinner preparations, watching nervously as Damien set the table for 8, the 4 members of the Miller family and the 4 of the Maxwell family. "Dad, why are those people coming to our Christmas Eve dinner?" asked Sophia, now 12, adjusting the napkins with the typical concern of a pre-teen trying to understand adult complexities. "Because, Princess, sometimes the best families are made up of people who have learned to forgive each other," Damien replied, kissing his daughter's forehead. Diego, now 15 and more perceptive than his father imagined, watched everything with growing curiosity. "Dad, is Mr. Maxwell the man you and Mom whisper about when you think we're not listening?" he asked directly. Damien and Eleanor exchanged glances. They had underestimated their own children's perception. "Diego, there are things in adults' lives that are complicated," Eleanor began. "He's the man who hurt you a long time ago, right?" Diego insisted. "And you're having dinner with him tonight?" The doorbell rang before Damien had to answer. Richard arrived first, accompanied by his wife Carmen, an elegant but clearly nervous woman. Sebastian and his girlfriend Julia arrived right behind them. The Sebastian who entered the Miller house was unrecognizable compared to the arrogant young man of 6 months ago. His hands still had calluses from work, his posture showed genuine humility, and his eyes shone with something he had lacked his entire previous life: inner peace. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," he said, offering a simple bouquet of flowers. "Thank you for having us in your home. I know this wasn't an easy decision." The first few hours were tense. Polite conversations about the weather, the food, neutral topics, while 2 decades of unresolved history hovered like an invisible cloud over the table. It was Diego who finally broke the ice. "Mr. Maxwell," he said during the first course, "my dad says you used to own a company. What kind of work did you do?" Richard paused with his fork in midair. "Actually, Diego, we don't have a company anymore. Well, things have changed recently. Dad lost the company because of debt," Sebastian added honestly, ignoring his father's surprised look. "But now he works for your dad, helping young people who come from families with financial difficulties." "Like you used to be?" Sophia asked with the frankness typical of children. "Like I used to be, yes," Sebastian smiled, "before I learned some important lessons about humility." During the main course, Carmen Maxwell broke her own silence. "Eleanor," she said, "I need to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For raising a man capable of forgiveness. I know what my husband did 20 years ago. I know you would have every right to hate us, but you chose something much harder. You chose to give a second chance." Eleanor squeezed Damien's hand under the table. "We all deserve second chances, Carmen, especially at Christmas." It was during dessert that the most significant moment occurred. Richard, who had been quiet for most of the night, finally found the courage to speak. "Damien," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to say, not just to you, but to your family as well." The table fell completely silent. 20 years ago I committed an unforgivable act of cruelty against your father," Richard said, looking directly at Diego and Sophia. "I assaulted him both physically and emotionally, and I tried to make him believe he would never amount to anything." Damien's children looked in shock from their father to Richard. "I was wrong on every conceivable level. Your father not only became an extraordinary man, but he used that terrible pain to build something beautiful. A company that helps other people, a loving family, a meaningful life." Tears began to roll down Richard's cheeks. "Diego, Sophia, you have a father who is stronger and better than I could ever dream of being. And today at this table, he has given me something I didn't deserve: forgiveness and a new opportunity." The silence that followed was broken by Sophia's soft voice. "Mr. Maxwell, Dad has always taught us that the bravest people are the ones who manage to apologize when they're wrong. Thank you for being brave." In that moment, 2 decades of rage completely dissolved. Damien felt a weight he had carried for so long finally lift from his shoulders. "Richard," he said, his voice also cracking, "you are forgiven, completely, and more than that, you are welcome in our lives." When the two families hugged at the end of the night, it wasn't just the closing of an old wound, it was the birth of something new, an extended family forged not by blood, but by forgiveness, second chances, and the understanding that people can truly change. But the true measure of that transformation would be tested in the coming months, when the world would discover the full story and judge whether the choice of forgiveness had been worth it. Ta Su Su, 3 months after the Christmas dinner, the headline on the front page of the country's most important financial newspaper was impossible to ignore. The revenge that became redemption, the extraordinary story of Damian Miller and the Maxwell family. Damian read the article for the 3rd time in his office, observing how the journalist had managed to capture not just the facts, but also the emotional essence of the transformation of everyone involved. The video of the original humiliation had resurfaced, but now contextualized by the full story of forgiveness and change. "How does it feel to be famous for a second time?" Eleanor asked, entering with coffee and the smile that still made his heart race after 15 years of marriage. "Nervous," Damian admitted. "The first time I went viral for being a victim. Now I'm viral for forgiving. I don't know which is worse for the family's privacy. At least this time it's for a reason that will make our children proud of you when they grow up." The phone rang. It was the 10th call of the morning. Journalists, television producers, conference organizers, all wanted to interview the man who chose forgiveness over revenge. "Mr. Miller," his secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Sebastian Maxwell is here to see you. He says it's about the interview on national television this afternoon. Send him in." Sebastian entered the office with the quiet confidence he had developed in recent months. His work as Director of Social Responsibility at Miller Capital had been an extraordinary success, combining his personal experience with transformation and his privileged education to create innovative programs. "Damian, you need to know the national TV producer wants me to be in the interview too," he said, sitting in the chair that once belonged to the city's most powerful executives. "They want to hear the side of the villain who was redeemed. How do you feel about that?" "Scared," Sebastian admitted, "but I think I have to do it. How many privileged young people will see it and maybe realize they can choose a different path? How many parents will see that it's never too late to teach humility? And your father, how is he handling the exposure?" "Better than we expected. In fact, he got an interesting call yesterday." Sebastian smiled, pulling an official letter from his pocket. "The university has offered him a position as a volunteer counselor for low-income students. They want him to use his business experience and his personal journey to be a mentor." Damian read the letter, feeling a wave of genuine pride for the man who had been his enemy for so long. "There's something else," Sebastian continued. "Carmen, the cleaner you met through the security cameras, wants to talk to you." "Carmen? Why?" "She says you saved her life in 2 ways. First, by paying for the medicine she needed. Second, by transforming me into the kind of person who would care enough to do it." The emotion hit Damian like a wave. Carmen represented all the invisible people he had defended over the years, first unconsciously through his own experience, and then consciously through his company. "Sebastian, do you know why this all worked? Why you truly changed when so many other people in similar situations would just fake it until they could escape?" Sebastian thought for a moment. "Because you didn't try to break my spirit, like my father tried to do to yours. You gave me the opportunity to discover my own humanity." "Exactly. True revenge isn't about destruction. It's about transformation. It's not about making someone pay. It's about making someone grow." The rest of the day passed quickly. The national interview was a success, with Damian and Sebastian elegantly articulating how cycles of pain can be transformed into cycles of healing when people choose growth over retaliation. During the interview, the host asked the question everyone was thinking. "Mr. Miller, you spent 20 years and millions of dollars planning an elaborate revenge. Was it worth it?" Damian paused, looking at Sebastian sitting beside him, the young man who had transformed from antagonist to ally, from enemy to family. "The revenge I planned was not worth it," he answered honestly. "But the journey it took us on, that was worth every moment of pain, every dollar invested, every sleepless night, because in the end, we didn't just win justice, we won a family." When the cameras turned off, Sebastian stayed behind. "Damian, there's one last thing I need to tell you." "What is it?" "Thank you for saving not just my life, but my soul. And thank you for teaching me that the best revenge isn't to destroy your enemies, but to transform them into family." But the true test that the transformation was complete and lasting would come 6 months later, when a new generation of the Miller-Maxwell family would face their own test of character, proving that the lessons learned had truly created a lasting legacy. 1 year after the Christmas dinner, the university's auditorium was packed. More than 1,000 people, students, business leaders, journalists, families, had come to hear the lecture, From Enemies to Family, a journey from vengeance to forgiveness, presented jointly by Damian Miller and Richard Maxwell. In the front rows, Eleanor held Carmen Maxwell's hand as they both watched their husbands share a stage that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Beside them, Diego and Sophia Miller chatted animatedly with Sebastian and Julia, who had announced their engagement the previous week. "It's surreal," Carmen whispered to Eleanor. "A year ago, I didn't know if my marriage would survive the shame. Today, Richard is happier than I've seen him in decades." "Forgiveness has that power," Eleanor replied. "It not only frees the one who forgives, it frees the entire family." On stage, Damian was concluding his part of the presentation. "Revenge consumed me for 20 years, he said, his voice echoing in the silent auditorium. "It made me financially successful, but it made me a failure as a father and husband. The real victory didn't come when I gained power over my aggressor. It came when I chose to use that power to heal instead of destroy." Richard stood up for his part, visibly nervous but determined. 2 years ago, I was a broken man who had lost almost everything. My company, my self-esteem, the admiration of my son, he began. "Today, I work for the man I hurt the most in my life, and I can honestly say I've never felt richer." A young student raised her hand during the Q&A session. "Mr. Maxwell, isn't it hard to work for someone you hurt so much?" Richard smiled, looking at Damian. "Actually, it's liberating. Every day I spend trying to make up for the wrong I caused is a day I feel more human. Damian isn't my boss, he's my teacher, showing me daily how to transform pain into purpose." After the conference, both families gathered for dinner at the restaurant where Damian and Eleanor had celebrated their first wedding anniversary 15 years earlier. The table was lively, with overlapping conversations and genuine laughter, a sound that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year before. "Uncle Damian," said Julia, Sebastian's fiancé, using the honorary title that had emerged naturally, "Sebastian told me you're planning to expand the student scholarship program." "Not just expand it," Damian replied, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We want to create a model that other companies can replicate. Richard is leading the research on how to identify young people who, like me, just need a chance. And like young people like me who need to learn humility before it's too late," Sebastian added with a self-deprecating smile. Diego, who had been observing everything in silence, finally spoke up. "Dad, can I ask a personal question?" "Of course, son. If you could go back in time and prevent that night 20 years ago, would you?" The question silenced the entire table. Damian looked around the table, at Eleanor, who had been his anchor during the darkest years, at Sophia, who had inherited his determination but without his bitterness, at Diego, whose precocious wisdom constantly surprised him, at Richard, who had transformed from tormentor to mentor, at Carmen, who had endured decades of guilt without knowing how to help, at Sebastian, who had discovered his humanity through humility, at Julia, who had brought even more light to a family already illuminated by forgiveness. It was the fundamental question, whether all the pain, all the obsession, all the years of planning revenge had been worth it. "No," he finally answered, "I wouldn't change a thing, because that terrible night taught me that evil is only permanent when we choose for it to be. Pain is only destructive when we don't transform it into wisdom, and revenge is only empty when we don't turn it into redemption." Richard nodded, his eyes moist. "And it taught me that it's never too late for a second chance, as long as we're willing to do the work to become worthy of it." As the two families walked together through the illuminated city, Damian reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken them from that initial moment of hot coffee to the face to this night of celebration and unity. The revenge he had planned for 2 decades turned out to be the most important thing he had ever done, not because he had destroyed his enemies, but because he had discovered that true strength lies not in breaking other people, but in helping them rebuild themselves. And when Diego asked him later, back at home, if he still stayed up at night planning the future as he used to, Damian smiled. "Yes, son, but now I plan how to build, not how to destroy. I plan how to love, not how to take revenge. I plan the legacy I want to leave you, a world where more people choose forgiveness over retaliation." That night, for the first time in 20 years, Damian Miller slept in complete peace, knowing that he had transformed his greatest wound into his greatest strength, his greatest enemy into his extended family, and his thirst for revenge into an inexhaustible source of compassion. The revenge of time had turned out to be the sweetest of all, not the destruction of the one who had hurt him, but the transformation of everyone involved into better versions of themselves. And in the words that would become the unofficial motto of Miller Capital, the best revenge is not to defeat your enemies, it is to love them back to their humanity.